News on the front page, or the adverse commentary inside, or even just the grubby newsprint. But whatever it is, Ed Miliband has announced that he's not much interested in British newspapers. If this was said about you, would you even pick up the newspapers? Well, in an interview with the trendy BuzzFeed website, Ed Miliband now tells us, "I don't read much British news." You get a lot of advice in the newspapers about what you should do. It's much more important to follow your own path. Instead, his favourite reading material is the American online news compendium Real Clear Politics. But is that really such a good idea for a man who wants to be the British Prime Minister? Mrs. Thatcher couldn't find much time for the papers. Studied nonchalance hide an unhealthy interest in their daily coverage. So Newsnight asked the government's two leaders what they read, and we can exclusively reveal Nick Clegg reads a range of newspapers and frequently watches news output across a range of platforms. He also reads a novel at the end of the day before going to bed. He's currently reading The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. David Cameron reads a wide range of papers, also occasionally the political blogs. He often watches the 10 o'clock and the ITV News, and sometimes Newsnight. Well, thank goodness for that. Well, Sir Harold Evans has edited both the Sunday Times and the Times. Eleanor Goodman is a freelance journalist and former political editor of Channel 4. And Carl Cannon is the Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, which we know is Ed Miliband's favourite. But Harry Evans joining us from New York. First of all, is Ed Miliband right to ignore British newspapers?
Well, I understand why he's revolted by some of the attacks on him, which I don't have much. But I'm really surprised for a Labour man wishing to take the bread out of the mouths of starving hacks. I mean, does he have no sympathy left for the working classes who carry a pen?
But on a more serious point...
No, seriously.
Yeah.
No, it's a grave deficiency. The curious thing is, I'm totally an admirer, of course, of the web. My wife started the Daily Beast. But you have to know that some websites are not reliable. They may actually flatter Mr. Miliband, but they don't flatter the concept of integrity. I mean, curious enough, the actual BuzzFeed website, which got this interview, it's very hard to tell on that site what's news and what's advertising. Right. They make a point of it. So you have to be very careful in dismissing newspapers.
Eleanor Goodman, I mean, we have to say that not always are newspapers accurate. But it is understandable to be drawn into, for example, adverse comment, even from perhaps commentators that he admires.
I cannot quite understand why he doesn't want to read the newspapers every day, and perhaps why his aides don't want him to see them in the totally unexpurgated version, because I think he would be so depressed. Look at Nick Clegg. I mean, he says he does read the papers. God knows how he can manage it. I think he would choke over his breakfast.
But when we've got recent surveys which show that 73% of adults still read a daily newspaper each day, isn't there a danger that Ed Miliband is actually out of touch with the majority of the voters that he badly needs?
I think an awful lot of floating voters don't read the papers, which is one of the problems the politicians have in communicating with them. And obviously there's a danger that he may be bounced in some way out TV studio about, what's your view on what One Direction we're up to in a cab in New York or whatever. But I think the more serious danger is that if politicians do read the minutiae of the coverage every day, they, as Tony Blair admit, become obsessed with tomorrow's headlines and micromanage, and rather than keeping their eye on the big picture. But I think the more serious danger is at the moment for Clegg is just being demoralised, and for Miliband too. I mean,